Welcome to the November 2024 CIECA webinar, Vehicle Data and Privacy, a Balancing Act. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communications standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenter is Adonne Washington, Mobility, Location, and Data Policy Counsel with the Future of Privacy Forum. In her role, she provides scholarship, guidance, and analysis for various policy and privacy issues related to emerging technologies. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenters. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the question panel on the webinar screen. And Adonne will also have an interactive feature in her presentation to gather input as we go through the webinar. If we have any questions at the end, we will address them at that time. And now I'll turn the program over to Adonne.
I'm so sorry. Hi, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for being here today and joining the webinar. Again, Adonne Washington. I'm here at the Future of Privacy Forum, where I lead on vehicle data and privacy. And so today I'm hoping to answer any questions that you all have around privacy and data and what that means for your industry and the work that you all do. I'm hoping to lead a discussion today and also have you all participate. So with that, active participation is very welcome. We'll be using Slido, and once you kind of scan the QR code here, you'll be able to see interactive kind of prompts pop up and you'll be able to respond. I believe the question function will be open, so I don't intend to close the poll, so you can feel free to put your questions in as they go. And I will leave time at the end for follow-up questions and providing other details. One other additional kind of thing that I'll give at the top, the Future of Privacy Forum is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is based in Washington, D.C. We lead on work around privacy, data, technology in various sectors specifically. So for instance, I lead on the mobility and location work, but we also offer guidance and research and policy, analysis in other areas as well. So with that, let's get started with our first question. So I like to start these conversations with what comes to mind when you hear privacy. So again, if you want to take out your phone and scan the QR code, you're able to kind of put in what comes to mind when you hear privacy, and we should hopefully see it start to pop up on the screen. I just want to get an understanding of where everyone who's paying attention today is tuning in from, what's on their mind. So data leak, we've got fraud, wonderful. There's also no right answers. There's no wrong answers. So please, please, please put in your words, and we can kind of see where everyone is. Oftentimes, people think of privacy as what that means for themselves, but they also think about it, what it means for the work that they do, or how it impacts the things that they, focus on, and what that looks like. So the larger words, as we're seeing here, security, control, those are words that are put in by multiple individuals participating. So we're seeing those as kind of the highest. That's great. Protection, wonderful. Limitations on data use, personal information being protected, non-public information, monetization of personal information, fraud. Fraud is a big one, I would say, this year. We've also seen a lot in terms of kind of control, and people starting to think about control of their data and privacy, both from their perspective or from other sides. So with that, thank you to those who put in words. Let's keep moving. My next thing is, what questions do you have? So again, we saw on that last one, personal information being protected, security, fraud, control, protection, safe, identity theft. What questions come to mind when you start to think of those words? When you heard about the presentation today, tell me kind of what questions immediately pop to mind. Again, this could be things that relate to you in your individual capacity. It could also relate to the specific work that you do. If you don't have any questions, that's fine. We'll have another opportunity for questions as I kind of go through. But if there's anything that you have that is a burning question that might be great for me to address potentially as I'm going through, I would love to hear that from you. And I'll give it just a second here. Best practices. Best practices is one of our favorite phrases in the privacy and tech space. What are the risks as autos become more rolling computers? Great question. How do we protect our company and partner companies? Amazing. Consumers protect themselves. Amazing questions. Some of the best practices. I like that one. All right. Again, we'll have another opportunity, but I just want to make sure that I'm personalizing this presentation a bit to some of the individuals who are participating in here, and I want to make sure that I answer some of these questions. And I think some of them should be answered kind of throughout the presentation, but these will be recorded through Slido, and we can always come back. Oh, the responsibility question. Perfect. How can consumers protect themselves? I'll give it just one more minute here. Learn from entitled. One other thing that I'll add is the work that we do around privacy. While I operate in the vehicle sector, the work that we do around privacy can be applied to different sectors. So useful to think about privacy. Great question. Is privacy a real thing any longer? So privacy, when you're thinking about kind of even this presentation, I'm hoping that some of what you learned today can be applicable to other areas of your life, be it as the consumer, but also as a service provider who is entitled to share access. How can I protect myself? Amazing. I might not get into, step by step in terms of how you can protect yourself directly, but I think there should be some answers overall to that. So with that, I'll click over and we'll keep it going. So ensuring privacy, privacy is the right to be left alone or the freedom from interference or intrusion. Information privacy is often what we're talking about when we're talking about privacy in the policy context. So information privacy is the right to have some control over how your personal information is collected and used. We incorporated the balancing act in the title because it really is a balancing act, especially when we're talking about the vehicle industry and a lot of the work that individuals do in this space. Why? You kind of need data to do some of the things that you need to do. It just kind of depends on what amounts of data, types of data that we're talking about. So as technology advances, and vehicles are not exempt from that, the amount of data and the uses of data increases. Difference between privacy and security that I should address at that outset, and it kind of came up in some of the initial thoughts when people were mentioning privacy. Privacy focuses on the use and governance of personal data and information, whereas security, so cybersecurity, focuses on protecting data from attacks and exploitation. So the privacy piece can kind of be thought of what we can do at the outset of anything to ensure that the cybersecurity piece, which is the protective piece of it, doesn't necessarily have to actually, flex their muscle in the event of a data leak or a data breach. And so protecting privacy at the outset can lead to better cybersecurity efforts at the other end of that. When we're talking about data, what types of data do we mean? Data can be non-personal, such as growth patterns for fruits and vegetables or weather patterns. Data can be personal data, so phone numbers, emails, things that might identify an individual. Or it can be even further on sensitive data. So still personal information that leans into the sensitive data categories, which can often be thought of as health data and or bank and social security. Those are the more sensitive bits of data that we mean when we say sensitive data. But the realm in which vehicles typically operate will likely be in that non-personal and more personally identifiable data that can link the car to an individual. One of the other things that is really important to kind of talk about when we mean privacy is it's not necessarily why it should matter to you. One of the questions that I saw was, is privacy a thing any longer? And there is a whole host of people who think that, it's gone, my data is already out there, so be it. Why are we talking about privacy? And that is totally fine for that to be your inclination. However, privacy is not necessarily why it matters to you as a person. It's why it matters to all the other people who don't necessarily get to make a decision about it. It also matters in the larger picture of how data exists in kind of everything that we do. You don't want to not worry about privacy until you're in the face of a data breach or a data leak. So thinking about it the whole time, whether it's important to you at the outset, it will be if something bad happens. So disclosing the purpose, and so in line with ensuring data, or ensuring privacy, privacy protections are necessary. Impacts to those in various communities can be felt by the use of vehicle data and personal information. So one of the first things at the outset is the importance of disclosing the purpose for collecting data and not going outside of that. And what we mean is collecting the data that you need to complete the service, the action that is being asked of you, and not trying to collect more information than needed. There are some certain exceptions and special circumstances. For instance, when you get the consent of an individual to share potentially additional information, right? But taking the steps to mitigate harms that could come from the misuse of data are necessary and are in line with that explicit disclosure and limitations on collection. Things that can help protect data, both for research or sharing. So certain individuals, I'm sure, do share data in this ecosystem, in the collision industry ecosystem, I'm sure, but in the vehicle industry broadly. So there are steps that can also be taken when there is data sharing that must occur. Things that can help, such as de-identification, anonymization, privacy enhancing technologies, strong cybersecurity practices, and of course, again, data minimization. So where that information comes in is all along kind of the spectrum and life cycle of the vehicle. So ensuring that, no matter where you sit in the process of dealing with a car, dealing with an individual in their vehicle or multiple vehicles, privacy is going to be important from the first step to the last step. So no matter where you sit, there is applicability here. Any information received again to complete the service or the action that's requested of you, privacy should be thought of in that process for how you take in that information, what you need, and how you're going to execute. Oh. So another question that I have: what concerns you most about data? I think this will fall in line with a lot of what you all indicated around privacy at the very beginning. But I'm curious, from your industry perspectives, what concerns you most about the data? For instance, we see some individuals are concerned about even having the data in the first place, based on things that they've heard. They get concerns around what that even means and what that looks like. So I'm curious as to concerns about the data for your work. This could be things that you pull from news headlines that you might have heard, or it could be just in the industry or space in which you operate, questions that individuals have had. So I'm curious as to where all of you have started to hear about concerns, what concerns you have, and what that might look like. And if I don't see anything, I will assume that some of those concerns from the first page do translate here, but would love to know misinterpretation. I love that first word. That was the first one that came up, and misinterpretation is one that I think is out there. There is a misinterpretation, um, misunderstanding, misrepresentation, I think, of all of the world of privacy and data. Um, Negative. Okay, interesting. Leveraged, that's great. Legal challenges if data isn't handled properly, How long is data stored with a company? Use in advertising, undisclosed tracking or use, unauthorized usage, misuse. I think I think the concerns obviously probably come from your industry, but also come from a personal place as well. And I think that aligns with where a lot of people are thinking about litigation and legal challenges, negative leverage, misuse. Okay. Seeing a theme in terms of where everyone is thinking. So I appreciate those of you who have participated and kind of put those um, those initial concerns in here, helpful to think about how it's being used, because I think that leads to a lot of these concerns, right? So how is it being leveraged? How is it being misinterpreted? Who is using it, the tracking, the use, unauthorized usage, and the use in advertising. So how do we reconcile all of those concerns that we have? What is missing, and why do these concerns exist? The recognition for privacy in this space is critical to the function and use of the data. However, everyone within the life cycle of vehicle technologies or working towards transportation solutions more broadly are not all equally situated in understanding privacy or recognizing where it goes. I think that leads into some of the concerns around misrepresentation. I think there's just misunderstanding for what data and privacy means. Again, sometimes individuals are not quite sure how privacy impacts the work that they do. But if you are dealing in data and information, especially when we're talking about vehicles that are moving towards more advanced and software defined features, we are thinking about much more data than maybe we once were. Federal privacy legislation, I think, is key to mention, and I'd be remiss if I didn't get on my soapbox for 2 seconds around federal privacy legislation. It would solve the patchwork of legislation we currently see at the state level. You can think about California, for instance, as having that as having that state privacy legislation that impacts and protects individuals in the state of California. But what about when we go to Michigan? We don't have that. And so how does that impact individuals who may traverse with their car from Michigan to California, right? You have an incident, you take your perfectly good car from California and you drive to Michigan, and then you have an incident. What does it look like when going between those different states? The patchwork that exists right now creates a varying number of bills, some broad, comprehensive, privacy focused, California, for instance, where we also see some issue specific, so biometrics or artificial intelligence, for instance, and even some more sector specific. So we see health related bills, specifically thinking of Washington State and the My Health, My Data bill. We also have seen specific state autonomous vehicle proposals, in addition to California, of course, having an in-vehicle camera bill. So it relates to the data that comes from in-vehicle cameras specifically. We also have seen, just in this last kind of few months at the federal level, a Car Privacy Rights Act, for instance, was proposed about last month or so. And we're seeing that that could incorporate specific privacy and data implications for the vehicle industry. I think when looking at those pieces of legislation, recognizing that the industry is so much broader, right, than just the manufacturers. How is that being accounted for in these sector-specific bills? How is the collision industry being accounted for in a bill at the federal level around vehicle privacy? And we've also seen it in the right to repair. So that federal privacy legislation could answer some of these questions and kind of take away the patchwork that exists, not only at the state level generally, but also some of the patchwork around sector-specific bills. So transparency is the last thing that is often missed. And I think this encompasses a lot of the concerns and some of the questions and some of the thoughts that a lot of you had around privacy at the outset of this. Transparency is another word for trust. Trust and trustworthiness are essential for any company offering any service, good, or any actual operation. So companies need to allow consumers to trust their privacy and data. And by allowing them to trust their privacy, that requires the company to take on the ability and take on the task of telling individuals what is happening. How is the data being collected? What information is being collected? Where is it going? How is it being used? And I think one of the biggest ones in transparency practices and transparency and privacy practices is, are you sharing this information? Is it going to be used to inform, in the vehicle space, of course, insurance? Is it going to be used to inform potentially the bank in the decisions they make around offering me a loan to get the vehicle, or to repair the vehicle. What is that going to look like? Is that information going to be shared and or potentially used for harm? I think if we, were sharing the information at all times for the use of good, we might have a different conversation around it. But when that data is potentially up for grabs and or shared without consent and or knowledge, on the consumer side, we cannot trust, the uses and or collection of that data. So that transparency piece is really important. You'll notice at the bottom, from this Deloitte consulting individual, this was a quote that was pulled most recently. A lack of trust can cost global brands 2.7 trillion a year. Trustworthy companies outperform competitors by over 2.5 times. So the dollars and cents really justify why trust is important in building loyalty. And again, trust and transparency go hand in hand. If consumers cannot trust what is happening, and I think we've seen questions, and that's why we're, here today talking about privacy. We've seen questions this past year and seen, um, news and legislators kind of calling for more transparency and understanding around what's happening in the vehicle sector. So what needs to be done, right? We've heard kind of the concerns, we've heard what's missing. How do we reconcile this space, and how do we get things done and get things in a better place where consumers do have that trust and we don't have to talk about privacy as kind of a big, looming, scary topic? Understanding of how and where privacy is implicated. So you've already taken the first step kind of by joining this conversation, and I assume probably seeking out other amazing presentations that CIECA offers around these topics. I think the June webinar was also sort of around the data space and understanding what's happening. So understanding how and where privacy is implicated for you, the business, and the work that you do. Perfect is not possible. Privacy risk is likely never eliminated, but it can be mitigated. So as soon as you understand where and how privacy is implicated, recognizing the mitigations that you can put in place to ensure protection for the data and for the individuals where the data exists. Bringing more clarity and understanding to what is going on in the legislative space will also signal what needs to happen at the developmental stage. While all this research and discussions around transportation solutions are key right now, recognizing that legislative schemes are going to create challenges for everyone. As I mentioned, some of the legislation can be more sector specific, which will automatically kind of put your antenna up when it's vehicle specific legislation or vehicle or AV specific legislation and or transportation. Your antenna might go up. However, some of the other bills, biometric or artificial intelligence, for instance, might actually have implications for your industry and or for the work that you do that you might not be thinking about. We are seeing many more pieces of legislation cover kind of these niche topics of information and data. For instance, Colorado passed the AI Act. And the Colorado AI Act covers all sorts of algorithmic processing and information, could have implications for some of the work that you do as you start to move for towards more automated systems just in our day-to-day work, and even internal to a company, right? So thinking about how these different pieces of legislation, even if they're not sectoral specific, may still touch on what you do. You cannot move forward with innovation if you are not going to keep these legislative and regulatory items, if you are not keeping these legislative and regulatory items top of mind. So understanding compliance with privacy data or specific technology laws can impact the work that we all do. So that's a really important piece of this. Entities dealing with vehicle data and our personal data should take steps to protect privacy that fall in line with all of these various schemes. I will, just mention that I said at the outset, we are looking at a patchwork, or in the previous slide, we are looking at a patchwork. So how do we, potentially decide what that looks like if we operate in various states, if we operate in various places? What does that look like? It looks like a bit more due diligence. And I know it feels like I've now said a few things that require, your business, your company, your industry to maybe take extra steps that weren't happening before. But I promise if you take those extra steps and keep abreast of what's happening in the legislative space, you'll be ahead of the game as opposed to behind it. So privacy protections should exist at the outset of any work that you do. From the moment that someone picks up the phone to call you to request service, understanding what information do you need at that initial stage and how do you maintain those records? How long do you need to keep them? If you, again, operate in a state with a privacy piece of privacy legislation that protects individuals in that state, what does it look like? And there's probably compliance standards for how long you keep something, how someone can call you to delete that information once the service is complete. So starting to think about those processes that you have in place, even at the outset. Now, when you're conducting service and or following up, this even can bleed into the marketing space and advertising that you do, understanding how and if any of that data may bleed over into that space. Are you asking the right questions of individuals who come to you for service and or conversation or consultation? Are you providing them with the correct information if you intend to maybe move some of that information over into the marketing and advertising space? Additionally, cybersecurity is a piece of this that I know likely exists and is fairly prominent and strong. There are other standards that I know vehicle manufacturers, for instance, stand by around cybersecurity. But thinking about your cybersecurity practices, no matter if you're big, no matter if you're a big company or a smaller company, thinking about the privacy or the cybersecurity practices that you have in place to protect individuals, your business, is really essential here to protecting privacy. I think finally, there is action from federal agencies that can be effective here. Those federal agencies, for instance, that govern a lot of what happens, I know for Department of Transportation and NHTSA and what they kind of require and or demand of certain industries and certain spaces can be really useful here to provide guidance on how everyone in, say, the transportation industry is thinking about cybersecurity. So they have their NHTSA, I know, has cybersecurity best practices, thinking about what that might look like for the industry in which you all operate. Again, transparency is something that I can't say enough. What does that actually mean? I think is one of the questions that we often get. So transparency is not just, hey, I said this thing and I'm showing you and here it is. It can kind of go deeper than that. So when we mean transparent, we really mean, are you providing an individual with enough information to make a decision about how their data and or information is exchanged with you, with your business? Are you providing them the necessary steps to understand, well, if I share this today, how do I maybe revoke that consent later? Or how are you all going to delete it? I'm not saying you need to give every individual a full business plan with step by step of how, data works its way through the system at your company, your business. But you do need to provide individuals with very clear recognition and understanding. I don't know that I can say that anyone has transparency perfectly right or anyone has exactly the cheat code for how to make sure every consumer who engages with them is fully transparent. But I know that there are a lot of companies, for instance, that comply with states that have federal or states that have privacy legislation are starting to think about transparency and what that looks like. Happy to talk offline about kind of different examples for where we've seen businesses that offer services, how they are transparent, what that looks like. So I think that is well worth a conversation to understand at your own company, at your own business, how transparency is best displayed for the work that you do. I think I just also want to highlight in the June presentation, you heard about CIECA and providing EMS standards, but you recognize that CIECA does not offer kind of that cybersecurity space in full. So understanding how your cybersecurity practices are in place can be essential. Limiting the data and information that you take in to only accomplish what you need to accomplish is important, but continuing to pay attention to the presentations that CIECA pulls together around this industry and around individuals that can offer guidance will be really key for aligning not only with the work that you do at your day-to-day, but also aligning the industry. Now I'm going to lean into work that FPF has done this last year to kind of give you an idea of where are privacy recommendations in the world of vehicle safety systems, especially again as we're talking about vehicles becoming more technology forward, and what that kind of looks like and could mean for the amounts and types of data that are going to be collected by the car and potentially could be something that is shared with your industry. So Vehicle Safety Systems Report is a report that we released in March of 2024. It highlights risks and recommendations in the space. The reason that this is an important topic and the reason that FPF decided to take the step to investigate and offer this report, NHTSA is promulgating a rulemaking for vehicle for vehicles to include advanced alcohol detection systems in the vehicle. FPF started to think about what does that mean for the types and amounts of data that are collected, and how will that exist and live on the vehicle. Our recommendations effectively include privacy as a foundational principle. That's something that you heard me talk about for the duration of this presentation. De-identification. How is the information that is in the car going to be de-identified? Well, that might be something that is removed from kind of by the time your industry, by the time the collision industry sees, a vehicle or handles, deals with an individual in their vehicle. What does that de-identification look like? Is that a step that's going to have to be taken out as an afterthought at your stage, or is it something that happens before? Accuracy and standards. It's going to be really important that we understand the accuracy of technology that exists in the vehicle, how to repair that, how to maintain that, and what standards exist. Again, transparency. As I talked about in the previous slide, transparency is essential to trust. It is something that is needed to ensure that all people can trust their car, trust whoever is servicing their vehicle, to protect the information that comes from that. And then mitigation of future harms. Again, privacy is why it matters to the whole, right? Not necessarily why it matters to you. So being able to put steps in place to mitigate any future harms to any certain individual, communities, industries is really important. The additional piece of the report, we conducted a consumer survey. So the consumer survey, you can see two of the graphics here. If you go over to FPF's website, which I believe was shared in the chat, if you head over to FPF's website, you'll see that the report, again, released in March, contains a number of survey results. One of the things that we wanted to understand is how consumers were thinking about their privacy in the vehicle and thinking about new technology as it's forthcoming. One thing to note, this survey was conducted in July of 2023, which was right before this kind of bomb news cycle that we had around vehicle privacy, vehicle information, where it was going, how it was being shared, and kind of the reckoning that we see in the vehicle space. So with this consumer survey, one of the biggest things that we took away: drivers are not against technology. They're oftentimes not against, advanced technology features. They're not against a number of different protections and safety features that will come to be and or currently exist in vehicles. However, oftentimes they want their privacy protected. We saw privacy as a theme throughout. So on the left, you'll notice the graphic, the highest one is they do have trust. There is trust. And when we ask the average consumer when we asked how much the average consumer would trust that data collected about passenger cars, so the vehicles that they drive, 34% indicated that they trusted somewhat. That is a high number of individuals overall that do trust it and have trust in it. However, that's not the majority. That's not the total majority, right? We still see that we have individuals who don't trust at all, don't trust very much, or are in that unsure category that kind of make up most of where people sit. So we're hoping that through kind of releasing and announcing that consumers do have privacy concerns, we asked them and they answered, will inform how individuals in the vehicle space are starting to think about privacy. and data protections. On the right, consumers were asked how much they trust that the data collected about them in automotive vehicles would be only used for the intended purposes. Again, mostly they do trust their vehicles, but you can see that there are some outliers in trust. There are the individuals who don't trust at all. Don't trust very much. We see the percentage of unsure individuals, and we still see that there are some people who have a decent amount of trust. How do we get that to a higher majority? How do we move those people from the don't trust at all or from the unsure category to really having faith and trust in their vehicle? Ensuring that people are able to trust the data that is generated on their cars and then shared or going elsewhere and utilizing it for only the intended purpose is really important for trust. Along with the report, we investigate new technology and systems that are forthcoming. Consumers overwhelmingly view the technology as something they want, but they do realize and rightfully show concerns around the information and how it can be used and collected, where it goes, and how it might impact them on a personal level. So again, while the report and while the survey was not specific to the vehicle collision industry, we do understand that that data that we're talking about that's collected from these different systems to provide kind of crash alert, notices or to provide potential alcohol detection, that information is going to be stored on the car and could be something that you see bleed into the work when you go and get the diagnostic information about what might have happened to the vehicle or what's wrong with the vehicle. How do we need to repair? How do we need to fix? What information that you might capture unintentionally that just comes off the vehicle could still have strong implications for personal information and data. So protecting that is incredibly important. And with that, I'm very happy to move over to, oh, if it wants to, there we go. Perfect. So we've got the Q&A coming up. I'm very happy to kind of take the questions as they come in. I'd be very happy to answer any additional questions. If there's something that I pointed out that you want me to go back to, by all means, I'm happy to have you flag that as well. It's great if you can do it in the Q&A function. I'm not sure I'll be able to switch between the teams to check the chat. So bear with me as I kind of go through this. Who can access drivers' habits? So very good question. Driver's habits can look like a number of different things. It can also look like a number of different data points. So driver's habits could look like, how many times the lane depart system alerted the driver. It could also look like braking. How often are they hard braking? How often are they stopping so quickly? What does that look like? And when you take these different data points together, it kind of can put together that profile about a driver. So when we're talking about habits, we're often looking at those different data pieces. It just depends on certain vehicles will allow you to turn off those sharing features. You can go into the privacy settings and the data settings and you can toggle those features off. And so if they're off, it's not necessarily collecting and or reporting out that information. So there's a potential for access to that depending on kind of the consent mechanisms. I will also say, right, when you get kind of the diagnostic information about a car, you might get information as it relates to braking or to steering or to different alerts. So understanding, if you are taking in that data or able to even access it through diagnostic sort of features or plugging into the OBD2 port, that information could be captured in that. I think one of the biggest questions that probably aligns with the access to driver habits or driver profile, as it might be known, would be the question about insurance companies. Insurance companies may have access to it if the driver has opted for an OBD2 port kind of feature, or if they've opted for data sharing through their personal insurance apps. That is something that could be accessed through that information. But it's not always a guarantee that an insurance company, just by insuring your vehicle, would have access or access to that information. It's incredibly unlikely that they would just have access to that information just by nature of insuring your vehicle, unless you've opted into a number of different arrangements. I hope that answered the first one. With the new administration coming in, what do you expect to happen with privacy law efforts? A very good question. I will caveat that with, I am not here to make any sorts of predictions about what is likely to happen in the new administration. I think as we're still trying to understand who is going to lead different agencies and have different roles, what the makeup of the House and the Senate is going to look like will impact legislation and efforts with privacy law. We've seen 2 renditions of federal privacy legislation come up. We've seen one fail. We've also seen the most recent one still kind of kicking around. I don't think we're going to stop any steam on privacy law efforts. I think both at the state and federal level, it's an issue that is bipartisan. I think people are going to continue to think about it and think about what that means. I think we might see changes with, I don't know, how often people are focused on sector specific versus overall privacy. But I'm not sure we're going to just see, no interest or no concern. I think it's a topic that spans beyond the administration, no matter who leads the administration and no matter, who leads any agency. But that's just my overall kind of thoughts. From the Teams chat, thank you for whoever put this in. Whose legal responsibility is it to clear customer data from vehicles that have been declared total losses? Wonderful question. I don't know that I have the answer. I will say the legal responsibility is a question that is open, not only as relates to total losses, but also, for instance, we're seeing questions about that just even in the vehicle rental space. How are we ensuring that the responsibility of clearing that information is gone? I don't know whose legal responsibility it is. However, my curiosity, and again, I'm not an expert in the collision industry, would be what are the capabilities for clearing any customer data from vehicles that have been declared total losses. So I'm not sure what the capability looks like. I'm also not sure if there's an arrangement, that might exist, be it at the manufacturer level to work with the industry. So I'm not fully sure. I'm happy to continue to kind of think through what that might look like. What are obstacles to better federal policies to create a better environment? Obstacles to create a better environment. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Let me come back to that one, or happy to have you re-enter it. But I think the question is around obstacles. I just want to make sure I'm answering it in the right way. From the Teams chat, I think you mentioned that NHTSA and DOT have cyber recommendations. Do they also have privacy recommendations? Really great question. NHTSA and DOT do not have hyper-specific privacy recommendations. This is something that FPF we've thought about, and we've tried to impress upon NHTSA and try to impress upon Department of Transportation. Also something that we kind of highlight in the report. These privacy recommendations don't necessarily need to be perfect. They also don't necessarily need to have any sort of mechanism for enforcement, right? Enforcement falls on the Federal Trade Commission for, data, false and misleading and data and harmful data practices. However, they are and have thought about privacy in the context of more recent rulemaking. So as we started to see newer rulemakings that look and lean towards technology and information, we have started to see questions around privacy impact assessments. What will that look like in this space? So no, they don't have any formalized that you could, take a look at today, but they have done more work around thinking about privacy in the context of vehicles and in the context of transportation more broadly. And I think it'll be something that they probably lean into more. So a request for information that they did this past summer related to artificial intelligence and the opportunities and challenges of using that in the transportation system. They left it broad for a reason. They were asking kind of all of those questions around every mode of transportation. What are the opportunities? What could happen? Where could it be useful? But also where could it go bad? Where could it cause harm? And in that, they are thinking about, again, are there privacy concerns around this technology? So I think we might start to see them trend more towards thinking about it. But as of right now, they do not have specific privacy recommendations. In your opinion, will a vehicle owner ever actually own the vehicle data of the car they purchase? Great question. In my personal opinion, I always think there is going to be an exchange of data that exists in your personal vehicle, right? We need to report. In my personal opinion, I think there needs to be, reporting for, did a feature on my car go bad? Is it not working? Especially as we see kind of over the air updates, it's important that there is a level of sharing and information around the data that might inform, why are the automatic braking system not working, or why is this other feature not doing what it's supposed to, or not, the lane assist not working to the way that it should be. So there's going to kind of be that exchange of data. I'm not sure that I would say, it's never going to happen. You're never going to have ownership of the data. I will say I think we are moving towards a place where we are giving individuals more ownness and ownership and clear ownership of that data, understanding when and where they can turn it off, how it can be shared. Again, if they have trust and transparency around what's actually happening, individuals can actually make the decisions around if they want to share that information. For instance, um, your vehicle location. A lot of people may not want to share that, but if you have an understanding of, here is how your location information can inform the how the vehicle operates, what features it can offer you, or what happens with it, there is an understanding that an individual can make that decision to then leave the location on or turn it off. So they do have the opportunity, and that is a really good import. That is a really good space in which we should move towards. So I don't know that I'll say you'll never be able to own it, but I will say we're starting to see a trend in the direction of how can we give individuals as much ownership and rights and control over that information. Um, the question on obstacles, I do want to come back to that. Um, I, I guess the best way that I can address kind of obstacles around the federal policy space to kind of create that better environment, I'm assuming better environment in the world of privacy and in the world of data. Obstacles, I think, are the traditional kinds of things that we think about when we think about how a law is made, how legislation comes to be. Different parties and different individuals have different opinions on what they think should exist in these different pieces of legislation. I think one of the things that we oftentimes think about as we talk about technology and data and privacy and kind of things that are not necessarily always tangible, there's not a clear understanding of what's happening. This is completely unintended that it always comes kind of back to that transparency piece, but if people are unable to kind of recognize and understand, how do you use data, and the first thing that they read is a report about how, vehicle manufacturers are all violating everyone's privacy and doing horrible things with data, then they're going to have those red alert kind of go off in their head, and they're going to think, hey, maybe this is not great, maybe it's not a good thing. And we're going to kind of see that trend of just, let's write legislation directly to kind of stop the practice altogether. But that doesn't necessarily always account for any sorts of kind of research exchanges that may be necessary to understand that could incorporate data. It doesn't always take into account, I think, for this group here, as I kind of mentioned with the Car Privacy Rights Act, there's a lot of players in the vehicle industry and in the vehicle data industry in space. And if we're talking about legislation, that's the Car Privacy Rights Act, but there's no mention of, what happens when there's an incident? What happens to the collision industry? How are we implicated by this? And have they considered us in this legislation? That is kind of the obstacle that exists. So we're starting to see legislation, both sectoral specific, but also kind of broadly that covers privacy and data, but is not taking into consideration all of the people that might be implicated, all of the people, the industry, the work that might be implicated by kind of these broad reaches for the legislation. Um, I'm not necessarily saying that all of you need to go out and lobby for the particular kind of topics and things that impact you, but starting to again pay attention and recognize where the concerns exist at the legislative and regulatory sector, and understand that some of that does come down to kind of just understanding what's actually happening to provide clear and strong legislation. I think other obstacles are people have differences in opinion on how much we want to, give consumers rights around privacy, and also how much do we want to to lead innovation, right? How much do we want innovation to thrive and give businesses and companies an opportunity to create things and do different things? I do not believe innovation and privacy need to be at odds. I think as long as we are doing the privacy piece, that innovation piece can still exist and happen. And so you're kind of seeing the obstacles come up in terms of how people are thinking about privacy protections. Are they thinking of them as more restrictive in the grand scheme of innovation, or are they thinking of them as a way to provide consumers with that transparency, the trust, the rights, the ownership in that information that will then allow them and want them to allow them the opportunity to want innovation and newer technology? So I think those were the couple of questions. I do hope I answered the obstacles one. I saw some other things come into the chat. But I'll just do a last call as we get to the end of this if there are other questions. And if not, I'll just pass it back to Paul.
Great. Thank you, Adonne. A lot of great information there, and I enjoyed your interactive presentation. I think that gave the attendees a great way to participate. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Well, that it concludes our presentation. I would like to mention that CIECA has partnered with the Automotive Management Institute. Attendees of the webinar are eligible to receive credit towards a professional designation from AMI after taking a short quiz on their website. A link will be sent to all attendees. And with that, thank you, Adonne Washington, for a great presentation, and thanks to all our attendees.
Thank you.